In recent videos, I talked a lot about behaviors and how to manage negotiations and how to be effective. But I thought in this video that I'd bring it back to those who are watching this, listening, because I know some people will want to understand how they can be more effective at negotiations. So if that's what you want, then this video is for you. On the other hand, if you also just want to hear me being rude about politicians, then you may also find this video interesting. But I'm not going to be delving too much into the politics of things. I want to try and explain to people what sort of things they should think about if they want to be personally effective at any negotiation that they may be engaging in their personal or professional life. So let's start a little bit. Let's have a little bit of a thought experiment here. And let's just focus on you. Let's understand how would you conduct yourself? Now I presume that people listen to this will have a professional life. They will, work somewhere, do something. So they will have an understanding of how they might like to behave in certain situations. Now you may be thinking of behaviors in the context of being polite, being respectful, being nice to people. And whilst that's very true in negotiations, you'd always do all those things. For me, behaviors is a much wider concept. Behavior is not just about how you conduct yourself, presentationally. Behavior is also about how you convey yourself to the other side. And that's a little bit different. And the reason why that's different, in a nutshell, is because it's all about being professional. You want to project yourself as a professional person with credibility that can be taken seriously, and that when you are negotiating on any particular matter, then people should respond positively to what you're saying. So it's not just about being polite. Behaviors is about being able to inspire confidence or trust, being able to elicit positive responses. And also, behavior is also about making the other person feel listened to. And that's a very understated but very important concept in negotiations. And I talk a little bit more as we go along. The other thing I would also encourage you to think about when examining how you can be more effective at any negotiation or work type scenario is attitude. So what is your attitude entering into that negotiation? Do you respect the other side, for example? Do you not think much of them? And you may have good reasons for that. You may have good reasons for thinking the other side are a complete bunch of incompetents and whatever else. But that runs a danger of influencing your attitude. And if your attitude is that you're going to go in there, treat them dismissively, then what you do is you run the risk of being surprised, perhaps being outflanked or being out-negotiated. So attitude is very important. Attitude is a state of mind of, I still want to be professional. I still want to achieve certain objectives. And I understand what it is I need to do, not only in terms of behaviors, but also in terms of approach. How am I going to, come at this? How am I going to deal with these people, especially if they're difficult people? And am I going to treat them, decently, or am I going to be very firm? For example, do I need to have a firm attitude in order, not be taken for a ride, in order not to have to deal with bad behaviors on the other side? So these are all things you should think about when you're trying to assess how you're going to be effective. So let's look at some examples. And I'm going to focus on politicians because it's very easy to do that. Shouldn't always talk about politicians, but it's easy to do so. And also because politicians are actually negotiators, in all honesty. You cannot be a successful politician in any advanced democracy without the ability to negotiate. I mean, sure, you can be some sort of politician in an authoritarian type system, and you don't need to negotiate in an authoritarian system. But in any kind of democracy, you will never achieve anything by acting like an authoritarian. Politics is all about compromise. It's all about negotiating with other people to achieve outcomes that you want. And no matter which country you may apply this to, any politician or any successful politician will have to, in their own right, be negotiators at the macro and micro level. And what I mean by that is at the macro level, they've got to persuade people to vote for them. Simple as that. They've got to negotiate that, with people that they're credible, that they're someone that should be voted for. On the micro level, they have to deal with other politicians who can block them. So they will have to negotiate some kind of compromise or resolution to a problem. So this is why I talked about politicians a lot in terms of negotiation. They provide some standout examples. So let's start with a really obvious one, a really standout example. And just to give you a small hint, this is an example of how not to do it. So Donald Trump prided himself as a negotiator. He frequently talked up his negotiation skills. I believe he's even published a book, I think, called The Art of the Deal, although I understand he may not have actually written the thing. In my view, and I'm certainly not alone in this view, Donald Trump is a terrible negotiator. He is dreadful. He's not any kind of negotiator at all. And there's several reasons why I think this. When I talk about behaviours and being respectful and polite to each other, I don't think you can ever see that in Donald Trump. Donald Trump is about as civil as a punch to the face. So we can see that behaviour-wise and attitude-wise, he's not there at all. What he is someone with power, whether political power, whether financial power, whether perceived power even. It doesn't even have to be anything tangible. And he uses and abuses that to achieve his aims. The short story really is he's a bully. And he bullies people into giving him what he wants. And that's not negotiation, that is being a bully. And this is sometimes a common mistake made by successful businessmen. They think they're good negotiators, but really all they are authoritarian figures. They tell people to do them, people go do them. That doesn't mean they're effective as negotiators, doesn't necessarily mean they're effective as leaders. Maybe it does in certain contexts and maybe it doesn't in others. But certainly in the case of Donald Trump, he cannot negotiate. And the obvious example of this is the testimony from his national security advisor, John Bolton, when Donald Trump was negotiating directly opposite the leader of North Korea, King Jong-un, I believe, if I pronounce that correctly. And in the words of John Bolton, Trump folded like a wet sack, really. So he just gave away stuff. He wasn't any good at actually negotiating. He didn't have the patience. He didn't want to have the details. If anything, he almost seemed to be sucking up to the North Korean leader. So even though he's president of the United States, he almost seemed a little bit, very much in awe of the other side. And that's another hallmark of being a bully and sort of pretend negotiator. Is that when you come up against an equal or perceived equal, your perceptions, your overconfidence as a negotiator just fall apart, really, because the equal is not intimidated by your power or money or whatever it is that you normally rely on. So you have to be able to negotiate in the details. You have to be able to focus on the stuff that matters, understand the how to do it. So for anyone who ever says that Donald Trump is a successful negotiator is completely and utterly misunderstanding things. He's a very failed negotiator, and his time as president, I think, is quite obvious of that. Congress and the Senate hated him. He failed to achieve much compromise with them, and he failed at various international negotiations. He did not succeed. I'll talk a little bit more about that and one of the other individuals we'll come to. Well, let's flip this the other way. And those who follow this channel will know that I've spoken about Michel Barnier several times and done a video on him. And right now, Barnier is an example of a very successful negotiator. He negotiated on behalf of the EU for, again, Brexit. And the skills, I won't go too much into detail, watch the previous video if you want more detail. But Barnier is a negotiator that understands compromise, he understands details, he understands the need to be perceived as credible and as someone who is true to their word. So the particular things, skill sets to look at Barnier are organisation and stakeholder management, which are not small skills in the negotiation world. People focus too much on personality, for example, and ability to communicate, like Donald Trump. He is a massive personality, and although his communication skills are somewhat blunt, he gets the message across in his own way. But actually, that's not the most important thing you need as a negotiator. You need to be able to be credible, organised, and you be able to manage people, to persuade people to support your position. So Trump failed miserably in that regard. Barnier was an astonishing success in that respect. So that's why I hold him up as a very successful negotiator. Now, of course, we now have Lord Frost as the UK negotiator on Brexit. I'm not going to bother talking about David Davis and Dominic Raab, because they were just useless. So that's pretty obvious. The Lord Frost, however, is a little bit different. Now, he comes across as a little bit more credible than his predecessors. There's a bit more of a serious individual. So what's interesting about him, he's almost comes across actually quite Machiavellian. And the reason for that is because he talks a good game, but the minute you start digging into the details of the stuff that he is presenting, then you start to spot the cracks and the issues. But of course, he seems to be more of a politician in some ways as Lord Frost. I know he supposedly was a businessman. But actually, so when it comes to what he presents as negotiation positions, they, on the very surface of it, to someone who doesn't scratch any deeper, they almost appear like reasonable positions, like clear argument. But this is where it comes to digging into details, because as any, to be successful as a negotiator, details absolutely matter. So there's a question here, and the question is Lord Frost really that incompetent? Does he believe what he's saying? Or is he that little bit more Machiavellian? He is playing the political game, but behind the closed door of negotiations, he is acting more professional. I don't know. But certainly behaviour-wise, in the public, there are some definite issues. I've spoken before about how he had tried to scupper EU proposal the day before they were submitted, and talk about the way he oversimplifies things, the way he presents very incoherent arguments to anyone who wishes to dig into that any deeper. So in many ways, Lord Frost could be credible. He could be a competent negotiator, but his credibility has been very much undermined because of his linkages with the Brexit project and the way he had to support that come what may. Now, small caveat here, there may not be him as a person. He may be forced to do this because, he's obeying the orders of his boss, Boris Johnson. And we all know what his leadership style is like. It's a bit incoherent at times. So that's very difficult to negotiate effectively if you're not being given effective instructions and direction. So it is possible that this is one of the things hamstringing Lord Frost. But he's certainly more competent than his predecessors. That part is clear. Let's swing this the other way. Let's talk about his boss, Boris Johnson. Now, we all know about Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, stroke politician, stroke mayor, stroke journalist, and all the other bits and pieces. I don't intend to talk anything about that. But what I ask is, think about him as a negotiator and ask yourself, is he an effective negotiator? Now, whether you subscribe to the belief that he's a clown or that he is actually clownish in public but very Machiavellian in private. That is obviously a matter of personal opinion. But when it comes to trying to analyze him as a negotiator, it's quite hard to see how he can be a successful one. And he must have some degree of ability to be successful as a negotiator. He's the Prime Minister. You don't get to be the Prime Minister and the leader of a political party if you cannot persuade, politicians to support you, if you cannot persuade the electorate to vote for you. So he must have some form of negotiation skills in order to have achieved the position he is at. But by contrast, it is not difficult to make the argument that his clownish behaviour very much undermines his credibility on the negotiation stage. And we're seeing that at all sorts of international meetings. He is not achieving much at all because he is not taken credibly. He's not taken seriously by many world leaders. And they dismiss his views very much out of hand. Whether fairly or unfairly, perhaps a matter of opinion, but certainly they do not trust him and do not take him seriously. And so, when he makes a proposal, it may possibly be a good proposal, but it's automatically going to be viewed within that lens of distrust and non-credibility. The other thing also worth highlighting about Boris as a negotiator is he talks too much. And I know this might amuse people a little bit. Surely, if you are a negotiator, you need to talk. Well, actually, no. As a negotiator, you need to listen. And if you talk too much, you either give away your position or you betray your thoughts. And believe me, betraying your thoughts sometimes is a very bad thing, especially if you're Boris Johnson, presumably. So actually, one of the things I wanted to highlight is that talking too much and talking in a way to hide the fact that you don't know what you should say, you don't have anything substantive to say, is something that people do at negotiations when they're nervous, when they're in a weak position. In other words, they're a little bit like Boris. So I wanted to highlight that part of his behaviour set, whatever his motivation for behaving like that. I wanted to highlight that that's something that any professional negotiator would try to avoid. So if you don't quite understand what you're saying, then talk less, really. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Starmer here, because Starmer is a barrister, and that really shows in how he behaves and how he approaches things. So Starmer has a very inquisitorial style. He will ask questions, and that is negotiation. So lawyers do sometimes make very good negotiators, and that is because they understand that need to question things. Boris Johnson, in contrast, doesn't question things. He makes assertions, he makes statements, sweeping ones based on emotions. Whereas anyone trained by the legal professional will go the other way, will try and build a case by getting to the facts of the matter, by asking lots of questions, and by joining up the information that is presented to them. So you can look at how perhaps a barrister would behave in court, when cross-examining a witness, as a form of negotiation, an adversarial style of negotiation. They are trying to obtain information from that witness, and they are using questions as the tool in which to do so. Now, you can do that perfectly, well, as negotiation, not so aggressively, admittedly. That the courtroom style is not necessarily appropriate at a negotiation, but that understanding that you need to have a really good understanding of the details and use that to shape how you're asking your questions and what you ask for is a useful lesson to bear in mind. In contrast to someone like Johnson, you just couldn't imagine him as a barrister. You couldn't imagine him having that inquisitorial style, and that itself is a bit of a clue that his ability to negotiate, they may be decent at a political level, but that's very shallow. He doesn't have that ability to negotiate when things are complicated, and you can see that in his leadership style. And that effectively he just directs people to do the impossible. That's it. That's his leadership style. So that again is another clue, perhaps, that although he may have some skill as a negotiator, he has some very significant failings as well. And then finally, I want to talk about Angela Merkel. And there's not a lot I can really say about Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany. But she has survived 16 years at the top of German politics. And that is fairly astonishing. And you don't do that by not being a competent negotiator. So think of all the people that Angela Merkel has faced down. She has faced down Donald Trump. She has faced down Boris Johnson. She faces down Putin on occasion. She had to negotiate with the Chinese president, so on and so forth. And she's done that for 16 years. So, and German politics as well is such that it's all about coalition building. And coalitions are built on negotiations. So I would say that Angela Merkel is not a flashy negotiator. She's not a big personality like Trump, for example. But what she is someone who quietly gets on with the job in the background. And so my belief is that Angela Merkel must be a phenomenal negotiator to have survived for so long as she has. Now, make no mistakes, she is not only, cute, cuddly bear. She can be ruthless when she has to be. And this was seen during the Greek debt crisis between 2010 and 2015, where she forced a lot of debt into Greece, and she negotiated very hard, quite brutally actually, in support of German interests and support of the interests of the EU, very much to the detriment of that of Greece. And you can make a case that the Greeks put themselves in that position, but certainly Angela Merkel made no bones about the fact that she was there to represent Germany, not there to show solidarity with the Greeks for their misfortune. So whilst there's not going to be anything particularly obvious about that, by certain accounts, she was brutal and very effective, and she dealt with opposition, quietly, but pretty mercilessly as well. So she's another example of someone I would say that you can look to as a very effective negotiator. So let's come this back to you then. You've listened this far. Hopefully I haven't bored you. Hopefully you enjoyed some of the commentary on the politicians. But what do you need to do if you want to be effective as a negotiator? And the honest truth is you don't need to be any kind of super, excellent communicator, or big personality or anything like that. You can look at all those individuals and you can see their strengths and weaknesses. And perhaps you can do the analysis and understand where they succeeded and where perhaps they were not so successful. But not everyone's a natural negotiator. So one of the advice I would give to people is create and wear a mask. And this can be based upon what you're comfortable being. If you're comfortable as a very chatty sort of person, then that can be your negotiation mask. But if you're not, if you're more of an introvert, then that is perfectly fine as well. You can be like Barnier or Merkel, for example. You don't have to talk very much, just a doer. But what I mean by wearing a mask is that negotiations are tough, they're complicated, and it can be very easy to react in emotional ways, particularly when you're surprised, particularly when you feel like you're losing control of what's going on. So always bear in mind that when you go into a negotiation, you want to project yourself. You want to portray yourself as someone who behaves well and with a good attitude. Even if that's not even true, fake it. And if you've got to fake it because you don't feel confident, or because actually you want to be underhand, for example, then you've got to wear a mask. You've got to portray yourself. You've got to hide your true intentions, perhaps. And it's not a bad thing to do. I'm talking about it in a negative sort of way there. But actually, think of the people you admire. And I've spoken about some politicians. No doubt you may think about plenty of other individuals. Think about their traits, their behaviours, their attitudes to problems, and copy it. Copy it and wear it for the purpose of you conducting your negotiation. That's one advice that I would give to people if they want to be effective in negotiation. Another advice I would give is to act like a champion. And this is a bit of a sporting quote here. I don't know who originally came up with this, but the sporting saying is that champions are champions off the field as well as on the field. So I spoke about Lord Frost undermining himself by how he behaves outside of the negotiation room. So that has an impact on his ability to negotiate inside the negotiation room. So whenever you're conducting a negotiation, you also have to remember that your behaviours, your action, even not in negotiations, can carry consequences. So bear that in mind. So think of any sporting teams, for example, where that's been a very core philosophy. I know this was the case for the England rugby team that was coached by Clive Woodward. He deliberately had the philosophy that he wanted the entire England team to behave like champions off the field as well as on, to turn up to meetings early, to look competent, professional, calm and in control. And, they went to win the Rugby World Cup. Gareth Southgate, the England football team manager, he has a very similar philosophy. He has imposed discipline on his team. No silly shenanigans, no silly wives coming to stay for drunken parties or whatever. Wear suits, look good, talk like people who care about the game and who care about winning and being good role models for the younger generation. So that again, you can see that philosophy coming through the England football team. And that should be applied to negotiations as well. And the final bit of advice I would give is, as with anything, preparation, key. Prepare well. You can wear that mask easier. You can be that more confident negotiator if you feel well prepared, if you think you know everything you need to know. Because the result of that, you'll be able to control things. You'll be able to control your emotions. You'll be able to control the tempo of the negotiations. And with that control will also come follow through. If you agree something at a negotiation, there must be proper follow through. And that is a key reason why you can see that even if Boris Johnson, perhaps in private, is a good negotiator, in public, he has very poor follow through. So if you're perceived as someone with very poor follow through, then you're not going to be perceived as a good negotiator. So I hope you found this video useful. It's a little bit of a tutorial on how to be a successful negotiator using public figures as examples. But yeah, I welcome any further questions or insights that anyone may have.